So today we are talking about this CrossFit voting thing. CrossFit leadership thing. I got voting on my mind, man. CrossFit leadership thing. So I read this article. I think it may have been an Harvard Business Review article. I'm not sure. And this may have been happening for a while, and I just wasn't paying attention because so much other stuff was going on. But there's this movement, and this company, I believe, was a Swedish company. And this movement of like running companies like CrossFit gyms from the standpoint of how leaders show up, right? That whole rah, one more time, work harder, push further, all of that kind of stuff. And what was interesting about seeing this, because this stuff shows up like this for me, guys, if I'm really in line and paying attention and allowing myself to be led. Remember last week we were talking about Can't Hurt Me with David Goggins' book and his whole accountability piece and pushing through, just going to that next level. Even when you feel like you're at your end, can you do 5 more minutes? Can you do 5 more reps? But in a space of no judgment for him, because he was very clear about where he was and callousing his mind and making himself stronger was really his way to show up to do the things that he wanted to do, right? But he wasn't passing judgment on anyone else. It's then this thing with CrossFit leadership showed up. And this particular company did things like mandatory workout sessions for an hour a day. I believe they even had like mandatory health checks and all of that kind of stuff, right? And the whole idea, they say that their productivity has gone up. They say that their engagement has gone up. But they also say that their turnover went from 8% to, I believe it was 27%. Now, their response to that was, that's okay, because that means we just get to hire the people we want, which is a whole different kind of rabbit hole you can go down. But what struck me is this, because I had also been having a conversation with my trainer, because she's also reading Can't Hurt Me. And she's a trainer, and she's really good. And she is driven when she's looking at her own personal goals, right? Her own fitness journey. She is driven to some extent by that, just one more. Let me just push through and get my own personal record on this thing, right? Even if I hadn't really prepared for it today, but I'm just going to PR this thing today, right? And so to a certain extent, she gets that, and she's kind of driven by that. On the other hand, she also says, I'm not the person that you come and you're yelling in their face, one more, just, you're not pushing harder. You can't push harder. And even talking to my massage person yesterday, she said, yeah, I was in this spinning class, and I'm not revealing her name because I haven't given her permission, but this just hit me today that it tied in. I was in the spin class because I've done all of this work on my breathing and kind of resetting my body so that I have my body is much more efficient. I was at these really high RPMs, but my heart rate was still low. And I had this instructor just in my face going, you got to turn it up. You're not working hard enough. Your heart rate isn't high enough. And all I could think about as I read this article, and I think about the situations I've been in when we're talking about leaders, right? And we're talking about leading teams, is the problem with, because this CrossFit kind of trend also said it's pushing against this whole authenticity leadership, and it's too soft, and it doesn't get enough results, and people are confused, and blah, 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 blah. And I'll address that confusion in a minute. But what hit me about this CrossFit thing is one of the challenges around it. So even if your organization is an organization where, and I think this is somehow a sports related organization, even if your organization is one that can take that kind of in your face, football coach, basketball coach running up and down the sidelines, even if it can take that kind of thing, the challenge is this idea of managing uniformly, right? I'm going to put this little pop filter, see if that helps. The challenge is managing uniformly, or trying to manage people uniformly, because not everyone needs to be or responds the same way to the same kind of encouragement or leadership or motivation. Everyone has different triggers. And when you are trying to decide, hey, my organization, now we're going to manage this like, a CrossFit gym. And I'm using CrossFit because that's what they use. It could be think of any kind of sport, right? Where you've got kind of that really hardcore coach, male or female, okay? Hardcore coach. The challenge is when you're looking at managing uniformly, not everybody is going to buy into that. Not everybody's going to be motivated by that person right in their face all the time saying, one more, push. You're not working hard enough. You're not productive enough. You didn't give enough. How come you aren't here? I mean, they were doing some clock in and rewarding people for being there longer, putting in the extra hours, because the idea was, if you think about something like CrossFit, and you think about any kind of, when you're building your muscle and building your body, it takes time. You got to break the muscles down to be able to build them back up. In order for you to get better, you got to spend the time, right? You don't just go out and run 1 mile today and then tomorrow you're running a marathon. It takes time to be able to work up to that ability. And so one of the things that they rewarded was time. It goes back to that old 1980s clock watching. If you were the first one in, the last one out, then automatically you were rewarded. You were the hardest worker. Now, you may have been sitting on your butt for 8 hours and maybe working for 2, but you were there for 10. So you get rewarded for being there for 10. So when I was reading this article about this CrossFit leadership, that high, heavy-handed coaching leadership thing, that's what came to mind for me, is that worry about not everybody is going to respond the same way. And if you're trying to swing that pendulum, because that's what we tend to do, swing that pendulum to say, the way we motivate people is just to push. We're going to make sure people are healthy because we got to manage mental health and physical health. And it really does make an impact on the cost of our business, right? If our people are healthier, then our healthcare costs go down. That is true. Now, if you're in Europe and you've got socialized medicine, it's not, the cost impact may not be the same, but the productivity can be, because if they're not there, right? They're not working. But that push, that if you're not there 10 hours, 12 hours, 14 hours, you're not working hard enough. One, there's a big fallacy in that, because extra hours doesn't mean extra productivity all the time. Because there are a lot of people who learn that game really fast, and they're going to be there before the boss. They're going to be there after the boss. And those are the 2 hours that they work. The hour before the boss leaves and the hour before the boss comes in, right? Or the hour once they get there, because they want to see them being productive. But if they're not being watched, they're not working. But the clock says they are. And the clock doesn't know. All the clock knows is, are you there or are you not? That's all the clock knows. The clock doesn't know what you're actually getting done. And so this idea of push is a potential swing back to the days of, we're just going to push our employees until they drop. We're just going to make it, mandatory that everybody is, here 14, 16 hours a day. We're going to push until we can't push people anymore. And that butts right up against the acknowledgement, especially after the pandemic, of this challenge around mental health, mental well-being. The idea that we do need to have some level of balance, which, balance is a challenge because there's always a choice and something is always not quite off kilter. So it's really more integrating everything into your life, right? Your personal time, your self-care time, your time with family, your time with friends, your time for learning, all those kind of things along with work. Because we all, unless we are independently wealthy, most of us have to have some kind of job that affords us the ability to pay mortgages and put kids through college and put food on the table and put gas in the cars and, get our public transportation stuff, all that kind of thing. Those are just practicalities that are real. And so we need to work. But as they say, if you don't manage your health will force you to manage it. So if you're not paying attention, and that health is bigger than just physical, mental, emotional, financial, if you're not paying attention to your overall health, it'll force you to pay attention to it. And so if you're looking at leaders who are now swinging the pendulum back, and this was a pretty young leader, so he probably isn't even a pendulum swinger because he wasn't even doing this kind of stuff when the old days were happening. But swinging this pendulum to, forced exercise. And I think they were even doing, I think they said at the end of the day, they would have people doing like ropes courses and all of this kind of stuff. And all I can think is, well, what about folks who need an accommodation? What about folks who, just had knee surgery? What about folks who, have back issues? What about all of these people that it doesn't feel inclusive to me? It doesn't feel inclusive to me. I agree, Kendall. It's irresponsible to think that a one size fits all will be an effective way to lead. It's just not. And so many new managers, if you think about this CrossFit thing, trying to manage everybody the right way and trying to be rah, If you got a percentage of people who don't respond to rah, they're not going to stay. At first, you're going to get a lack of productivity, and then they're not going to stay. Now, you may be okay with that because, you know, all of our choices have consequences, good and bad. And so we get to make whatever choice we make. We just don't get to have freedom from the consequences of our choices. But if you're okay with people leaving, fine. But then when you say, but that's okay if they leave because that gives us a chance to hire the right people. What does that mean? What does that mean? And does that mean you're going to start asking those questions around disabilities? Because the right person isn't going to be able to do your exercise at noon or climb your ropes course. Does that mean you're not going to hire people with small children? Because that means they're not going to be able to stay 18, 20 hours because they got small kids at home. Does that mean you're about to be selective / discriminatory in your hiring practices because they don't quote unquote fit? Because you now got a CrossFit gym at your work? Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not slamming CrossFit. I don't know enough about it to be able to slam it, right? I know what every surface person knows about CrossFit and the boxes and the jumps and watching people do it, which is fascinating. And apparently a really great way to build strength. So I have no, you know, judgment one way or the other about CrossFit. But this is about that raw, one more, no pain, no gain leadership style, which is not a fit for every organization, and it's not a fit for every person. And that doesn't mean you just roll over, and that doesn't mean you don't push people, but there's still a need to manage people somewhat at an individual level, because there's a difference in treating people consistently and treating people the same. And that's what leaders get confused. Consistency does not equal the same. The same is everybody gets a trophy. Consistent is you perform, you get a trophy. Everybody that performs gets a trophy, right? The same is everybody gets a jacket. Consistency is everybody gets rewarded. And the reward is going to match the thing that actually motivates the person. That's why so many people were going to these point systems for rewards, right? We did that at my last company. Some people want money, some people want trips, some people want ice cream makers, you know, whatever it is. So you have these companies that build these point systems. So employees build up points as their reward system, and then they can utilize those points to buy something. By the way, sidebar, if you do that, really have the conversation about whether or not you're going to gross up for taxes. Don't wait till you implement it to have that conversation. And if you're having the conversation and they're still not listening to you as the organization, keep pushing, because it's going to come up. Because people are going to say, I could have bought that iPad, you know, at Best Buy for less money once I had the taxes taken out. So I'm just saying, just think about that. So the other thing that in this article that talked about in this movement to CrossFit is the pushback against the authentic leader, right? This vulnerable leader, the leaders that are showing up and being more compassionate, the leaders that are quote unquote softer. And that kind of leadership leads to, because this is what the article said, that kind of leadership leads to confusion around expectations. So again, we speak the truth here. That kind of leadership does not lead to a confusion around expectations. What leads to a confusion around expectations is a lack of clear communication around expectations. Let me say that again. Being an authentic, compassionate leader does not lead to unclear expectations. A lack of clear communication around expectations leads to confusion around expectations. And no matter what kind of leader you decide to be, if you're not clear around what you're expecting and you don't have clarity around what your people understand and expect of you, there's going to be a misalignment. There's going to be a mismatch, and things aren't going to be as productive or as efficient as they could be because people aren't on the same page. And that is a fundamental piece, no matter what style of leadership you are choosing to use. It is not unkind to be clear. I will go to my grave saying that. Maybe that'll be on my epitaph. It is not unkind to be clear. Here lies Laurel. As she said, it is not unkind to be clear. Okay? No matter what leadership style you choose to embark upon, it is incumbent upon you to be clear with people who are looking to you to lead them, to understand the vision, to understand where they're trying to go, to understand the mission, to understand the risks and how you expect them to manage risks. And in that clarity, understand that your words are important, but so are your actions, because people will listen to what you say. They will believe what you do. And if what you're doing is saying, we had mandatory exercise from 12 to noon, but we say it's mandatory, but if you really can't, that's okay. But everyone who doesn't show up somehow doesn't get on the good project, doesn't get a good promotion, somehow gets called out in meetings or doesn't get invited to meetings. Your behavior says it is mandatory. And not only is it mandatory, but failure to attend, even if you have a reasonable accommodation, is grounds for limiting what we say is your performance, and therefore limiting your reward. So that expectation management is incredibly critical, no matter what kind of leadership you're talking about. But this movement towards CrossFit leadership or coaching style, those hardcore coaching style leadership, in my mind is kind of problematic. Because that yelling at people and pushing people and being nasty to people and ugly people at its tail end, right? I mean, there's of course a whole continuum of what that should look like. But at that extreme, because we still have leaders who are not true leaders, they are managers and they don't know how to lead people, they don't know how to engage. And if you move your culture towards this rah, one more, those people whose comfort zone is already to be belligerent and nasty and to downgrade people and to just be negative, that just gives them permission on steroids to do that. And if you're not paying attention to the impact of the change in the culture on your people, you will wind up with ultimately challenges around your productivity, your efficiency, your effectiveness. At the worst end, you may wind up with lots of litigation, right? Because people feel like they're being mistreated. And you absolutely are going to impact your inclusion and your diversity if you say those are important to you. If they're not, okay, well. But if they are, this can have a significant impact on that, because there is absolutely a different kind of way you're going to be hiring and looking for people and rewarding people and moving people around. If one of the measures that you're putting in is, are you coming to the 12 noon exercise daily? Are you walking the ropes course? Did you follow the ropes course? I think one of them even said they had people walking in water up to their chests for stuff. And for those of us who are germaphobes, I am not trying to go work out and get all stinky and sweaty and then have to go back to work and shower in some public. No, thank you. No, thank you. No. And let me just put this out here too. For people of color, we got hair stuff, y'all. So I'm just saying. Leadership is not about you. Leadership is about the people you're leading. And so if you're going to implement something like that, please put your active listening skills on high alert. What feedback are you getting back? What are people saying to you, and what are people doing? What is their body language saying? How are they performing? Are you all of a sudden seeing people take more vacation? Are you seeing people not show up at meetings? Are you seeing people who are always engaged no longer be so? What is the behavior that you're seeing of other leaders who are watching you? Because people will emulate what's rewarded. Sometimes the best thing you can have is a great boss. The next best thing is a horrible boss, because you learn what not to do from watching that person. At least most people do on a normal curve. There are those who will watch those horrible bosses to be like, oh, that's what I'm going to do. Because that feels more comfortable to me. That makes me feel more powerful. That makes me feel more like I'm the one in charge. And I like that. I like that feeling. So I'm just going to keep that up. And if they continue to get rewarded, or worse, they don't get punished or don't feel any kind of retribution, even if you don't reward them, if there's no consequence to the behavior, that lack of consequences actually encourages the same behavior. It's pretty simple. This is not like PhD human behavior. This is pretty simple observation. People will do the things that they see get rewarded, right? Or that they see work based on what they're trying to do, that they see equals success. And if that's berating people and pushing people to do one more, that's what they're going to do. But is that really what you're looking for? Because the other side of that is people who don't have the capability but are determined to be successful and determined to stay will find ways to, I was going to say cheat, but that's not fair. They may not necessarily be cheating. They'll find ways to circumvent the system to be successful. Now, one way you can look at that is, oh, that means they must be really bright and really creative. And that is one way to look at it. But the other way is, do you end up with some compliance challenges at some point, right? Because people are just trying to do what you told them to do. And if it's beyond their mental, physical, financial, emotional capability, but they're determined to stay, what are they doing to make it happen? And what's going to be the ultimate fallout of that? For them personally, for you as an organization, for you as a leader. So before we all just jump on this, I'm going to run my business like a CrossFit, let's think about what we're really trying to do. If it's a small business, right? What is your purpose? Why did you start doing it? What led you to this place to say, this is what I want to do? And how are you showing up in a way that lives up to that purpose every day? If it's a bigger business, a bigger organization, and you are one of the leaders in that organization, and remember, leadership is about behavior, not position. If you're one of the people that's leading in that organization, what are we trying to say? Who are we trying to be? And does our culture, true culture, match the face we put on the public? And is what we say outside what people feel inside? That's what you hear a lot. If you look at situations or apps like Glassdoor, or even some other apps that where people have freedom to just talk about their employer, give feedback on their employer, their leaders. You hear that a lot. You hear that a lot where people say, yeah, they say X, but here's what really happens. They say Y, but here's what really happens. That's why I look at a lot of the, greatest places to work with lots of skepticism. One, because I've been on the inside, right? With a lot of skepticism, because depending on who the survey goes to, right? So, and how much money you pay, where do you wind up on the list? Just saying, y'all, we got to be educated about what we're seeing. And that's not to say a lot of companies that are on those greatest places lists aren't really great places, but you just still got to do your research. You got to find out who you're working for and what their real motivation is, so that when you start working there, or if you make the choice to work there and you guys have made a commitment to work together, employer and employee, that you know what you're getting into, that you understand their expectations, that you are clear, and that you understand your own, and that you know they are clear about what your expectations are. And that all happens at the very beginning. And as things begin to change in a business, it makes sense to have those conversations on a regular basis. What's changing? What's changing in our business? We talked about that during the pandemic at the very beginning. Hey, here's the decisions we're making, and this is why. Just tell people. Just tell people. You do not have to reveal information that is confidential or is somehow non-compliant if you reveal it with rules around the SEC and all of that kind of stuff, especially around financial information. You don't have to tell everybody how the sausage is made. You don't. But it is important to tell people that there's sausage, and that maybe, pre-pandemic we were making beef sausage, but now, you know what, we're having to switch to pork or chicken or boudin. Give people information, because in the absence of information, people will make it up, and they will make assumptions, and they will behave based on those assumptions in the absence of real information. That's what happens around us globally. We get little trickles of information, and because there's so little real information, or it's so hard to get to the real information, we get these little trickles, and then our behaviors are based on that little trickle of information that may or may not even be accurate, because we have become, in many ways, intellectually lazy, because we can push a button and get the information. but it takes more than pushing a button to determine and discern whether the information is accurate, true, reliable. What was the source? Does it make sense? If I really read this, does it make sense? And what words are being used? Jerry and I were having a conversation this morning about some words that are being used, right? And the assumptions that people make because they don't read. Mm-hmm. Because they don't read. Is that thing you're reading saying that you're going to be impacted? Or is it saying that there is a potential to be impacted? Those are two completely different things. And it's important for us to understand we are not sheep. Although, given some of our behavior, one has to wonder, right? We are not sheep. We all have the ability to think and discern and decide and to take information in and make a decision. As Morrow said, we are all entitled to our own opinions. We are not entitled to our own facts. The facts are the facts. The truth is the truth. And your opinion may vary from that, and that is okay. You are perfectly able and entitled to your own opinion. And if it's contrary to the facts, just own that. Because it's your opinion. You are perfectly entitled to have an opinion that is contrary to fact. Okay. But don't try to change the facts to support your opinion. And leaders, especially, that's what happens a lot in business. When something happens and the outcome isn't what the leader expected, then all of a sudden, the facts change, right? The truth changes. That's just not true. That's just cover up. That's just CYA. True leaders own that. You know what? This was not what we should have done. And we made this decision based on this information and based on this perspective. And that was not the outcome that we anticipated because we didn't spend the time to do some additional research. Just own that. None of us is perfect. None of us is perfect. Mm-hmm. And the more, one, you do the research up front, proper prior planning prevents poor performance. 6 P's. Proper prior planning prevents poor performance. The more you plan, the more you try to get as much information as possible up front, whatever your timing allows. And then make your decisions knowing that there may be after acquired information or you may have to adjust or modify, and keeping some level of flexibility. Just say that up front. Hey, here's where we're going based on the information that we have. Now, should something else happen, then we want to make sure we adjust. So we need early notification. Early notification. There is nothing wrong. There's nothing weak in saying that. There's nothing weak in flexibility. There is nothing lacking in your leadership when you focus on your folks rather than you. If the first thing in your mind is, oh, what's going to happen to me if this doesn't go wrong? You are not leading. You're managing work. You're not leading. Because leading is not about you. Leading is about service. Leading is about other people. Just is what it is, y'all. Just is what it is. And so as you think about this kind of CrossFit leadership and how you're going to be leading your people, how are you showing up? What standard do you hold yourself to? And what standard do you hold everyone else to? And most leaders, most really great leaders, hold themselves to a higher standard and also recognize that they need to be mindful of their own physical and mental, emotional health. At least these days. Not all the time. We are getting much more savvy around the importance of mental well-being. And another side note, if you see something, say something. If you're feeling something, say something. If you need some help, ask for help. There's no shame in asking for help. And in this pandemic, when folks were having to be right up under each other in their little pods, when they hadn't had to spend that much time with their kids and or spouse and or partner, insert whatever here, that's a lot. And working. And Zooming. And trying to figure out how you're going to make some stuff happen. It's just a lot, y'all. And so a lot of things that were probably able to be brushed over and just as, oh, it'll be okay, really came to the forefront. For a lot of women especially, right? Because our quote unquote midlife crises show up differently. It's not about the car, right? Ours seem to show up as, oh my gosh, how come I can't do all these things I used to do? I used to be able to do 400 things at one time, and now I can only do 398. What's wrong with me? Really? But that's how it shows up for us. We automatically think we've lost it, right? And that's not the case. We probably shouldn't have been trying to do 400 things at one time in the first place, right? That's the fallacy in multitasking. We're always multitasking at some level, but the fallacy in multitasking is that you're doing everything 100%, when probably you're doing everything at a lower percentage, which may be okay depending on what the things are. So managing, trying to lead people uniformly, ultimately is going to be a challenge when you're trying to have long-term productivity, efficiency, and effectiveness, because everyone is not going to respond the same way. And if in moving towards that kind of CrossFit culture, that heavy coaching culture, that push culture, if you are not also very well aware and have extremely well-formed active listening skills, you're going to find challenges in your productivity and your performance and your turnover before you're able to recognize them, because you haven't been paying attention. So if it's what you choose to do, okay, just be very, very cognizant of the impact of that. It's just, when I went to grad school, we had to go to Bradford Woods. I went to Indiana University, Kelley School of Business, which, by the way, is a completely different place than when I went. It's fabulous. But before you started, you went to Bradford Woods for this outdoor team building thing. Can I say how much I hate that stuff? I hate it. I am not your girl who learns how to team better with people by being outside amongst the bugs, climbing ropes, holding hands, supporting people, going under. That is not, I don't need to do that to be able to work with you. I do not. In fact, what I see through that stuff is basically going to really tell me, yeah, no, right? That is not something that motivates me. It doesn't pump me up. It doesn't make me closer to people. It just irritates me. It just does, because I'm not that person, right? So when you're beginning to do team building and you're thinking about your culture and you're thinking about how you're going to exercise your leadership, understand that everyone's not motivated the same way. And that doesn't mean you have to spend so much time and money that you are so individualized that you spend more time doing that than getting work done. That's not what I mean. It just means be very cognizant of what you're choosing to do and how you're choosing to show up and the impact of that on your population. Because I got to tell you, I'm never doing an outbound thing again. That's just not something I'm going to do. I'm just not. And if I choose to build my business where I have multiple team members, I'm not going to make them do that either, because I don't want to. But there are other things that I also don't want to do that we do have teams. Like my teams that I had, very social people, right? They love the parties. They love the potlucks. I hate that stuff too. But that is kind of stuff that different kind of team building, right? I'm like, okay, well, we can do that. We can have a potluck. We can have all this kind of things. That's fine. I'll eat all the stuff that's catered, because see, I don't know what you're doing in your kitchen. But that's just me and my germophobia, right? But it's a way that people like to get together. They like to build together. And I recognize, to thine own self be true, I recognize my introvertedness. I recognize how and when I like to connect with people. I recognize my ability to be compassionate and to understand and to get to know you without having you be my best friend. Because there's only so much, we all, as I told you guys before, we all get this bag of marbles in the beginning. We only have so many marbles in our life. If you give all the marbles away, there's nothing left for you. And I have learned how many marbles I have to reserve for me in order to be able to function. And that doesn't mean I hate people by any means. I wouldn't say I love people, but I don't hate people. But I like to connect. I like to engage. I also know when my limits are, right? And I know when it's time for me to just take a knee and pause, to be able to regroup and re-energize, because I'm absorbing all of this energy from other people. And if I absorb so much, there's no room for me. So when you think about how you're going to lead, how you're going to lead your team, how you're going to lead your organization, how you're going to lead your business, how do you want to show up? Because we attract what we give out. And if you're in that sports arena, if you're in fashion, right? And what you do every day is you wear those 4-inch heels and your entire aura is laid every day. And that's who you want working with you, then by all means. because there's a vision, right? There's a culture, there's a brand associated with that. But just understand it. And understand that you may be missing out on some incredible creatives because that's not the way they show up. And that's okay. Because if that brand is really, really a key component of who you are, then be okay with that, as they will be. We cannot be all things to all people, but we also can't believe that our management style works for everyone. We have to be authentic, we have to be real, but we have to be honest about the consequences of the decisions we make around how we show up. And if we're showing up saying one more, push, that's not enough, stay till 10 and 12 o'clock at night, what does that mean in terms of productivity, right? And it's one thing if you're early in your career, especially if you're starting out in something like consulting, public accounting, those kind of things, there are some crazy busy hours. Crazy, especially about tax season and all that kind of stuff. End of year audits, it's insane. It is insane. Being on the road all the time, well, at least before pandemic, being on the road all the time, there are some job requirements that are literally crazy because of client demand. It'll be interesting to see how that changes post-pandemic, because I do believe some of that will be tampered down as well. But it's one thing kind of when you're early career and you're learning and you're growing and you're really broadening your experiences and kind of additional hours, because there's stuff you really got to learn. But that sustained 18, 20-hour day, one, it's not sustainable. It's just not sustainable. Even for the best of us, it's not sustainable. But that expectation that people sustain that over extended periods of time creates a culture that may or may not be aligned with what you say you want your culture to be. So just be honest as a leader. Be honest with yourself about what you're expecting. Be honest with how people respond to your expectations. And just be real about that. There is no weakness in being authentic, being compassionate, communicating more versus pushing people to the point of exhaustion. And sometimes people need that cheerleader. They need that push. If there's this really big thing going on, sometimes people just need that. We got this, right? We got this. We can make this happen. Let's just dig in and make this happen. The thing about high performance teams is they're generally a common enemy. That's why high performance teams don't always last for an extended period of time, because when the common enemy changes or goes away, there's not that common focus anymore to jazz everybody up, right? To energize them. So as things change, as vision changes, as mission changes, as products change, you know, as the ebb and flow of business, the ebb and flow of life, of things that are urgent or critical, as those change, that rah-rah, that cheerlead, that support ebbs and flows as well. When you got that big project, you got this major client, you're firing people up because this is going to like make a big change for the business. That's amazing. And people probably get on board with that because everybody has seen the vision and the mission and the impact. But when you get it, have you found a way to kind of level that back out? Or you're like, okay, we got that one. And that was, 14 hours a day to get that one. If we get 16 hours a day out of everybody, then we can get this one, right? How do you manage your governor? Talked about that last week. How do you set a governor on your expectations? Something that puts a cap on your expectations. Now, people will live up or down to your expectations, right? So if you don't expect anything of anybody, we talked about that too. Sometimes that on the receiving end of somebody having no expectations, that's actually cool because you can blow it out of the water. You can surprise them because they don't expect you to do anything. So go out and blow them away. On the other side, people can set expectations so high that there's no way you can possibly meet it. And the trauma associated with that can be long-lasting and severe. So the bottom line, leaders, it's up to you. How are you going to lead? And how much are you willing to invest in your active listening skills, in your connection to your people, in your understanding that no matter what your style, at the end of the day, you're trying to get people to be more efficient and more productive. And that means you've got to pay attention. Or are you so caught up in what you want to be, how you want to show up, how you want to be perceived, that you're unable to see the impact, good and bad, of what you're doing and adjust accordingly? True leaders, exceptional leaders understand there's always got to be flexibility and you always got to be able to change. because people change and situations change. And we've got to be willing to move through those. And I'm intentionally not using pivot because that word just makes me want to cringe now. But change and flexibility, morphing the situation, right? Morphing behavior to fit the situation. So go be a CrossFit coach, man. Fire people up, pump people up, have exercise things in the middle of the day, right? Have running clubs, do all that kind of stuff. Just understand what that means and how it shows up. And don't negate or throw out as unacceptable or unproductive or unsuccessful leadership styles that are less in your face. Because to say that leadership styles that are less in your face are the reason for unclear expectations is simply a fallacy. You got to have an ability to communicate clearly, no matter what your leadership style, because that's where things fall down. That's where expectations aren't met. It's when clarity is gone. You as an individual being clear about your expectations of yourself, of others, of your organization, and leaders in organizations being very clear about what you expect of yourself, of your people, and of your organization. And where those are misaligned, how do we have conversation to get clarity?
Can I do a recap with you real quick?
Yes.
Earlier you talked about the young girl who plays tennis who had to back out, who
Mm-hmm.
walked away from the French Open because of anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
Now, because her job is public and it deals with the people, as a coach or a leader, should she have been told, okay, take some time off, but you're going to have to learn to get comfortable to speak with the audience, with the reporters when they want to ask you questions?
You know, that's really interesting because there was a whole conversation about this, because the expectations that we have of people who are in public life,
Mm-hmm.
that they owe the public. They owe the public because we're paying to see you in a movie, because we're paying you to be an athlete. You owe us. But here's the reality: whether or not they show up at a press conference has nothing to do with their athletic ability. They are still going to be an exceptional athlete, whether or not they answer one single question. None. That is about our inherent curiosity as people, right? If we see you being exceptional, we want to know how. We want to know what you did. We want to know everything about you because we feel entitled to understand and pick apart why you're so good at what you do. But we're not entitled to that because we all have agency. So there's a bit of a fallacy that says because you're famous, you owe the entire population a piece of you. That's not true, because the piece of you is already given in your execution of whatever that thing is. Now, that being said, is there a way that someone could help her manage her expectations around managing the press? Absolutely. Absolutely. When you become a star athlete, when you become a famous person, speaker, author, actor, whatever, because the way society works, there's an expectation that you will be available to people. You'll be available to people, right? Mm-hmm. And so if you have that expectation, or yes, Kendall pointed out, sometimes you have a contractual obligation. If you signed up for that, then you got to figure it out.
Yeah.
Because you're right. Sometimes, so fundamentally, you don't owe that to anybody. Contractually, you might. If you owe it contractually, then you got to figure out a way to do that. You still need to be able to protect yourself. And maybe what you say is, under contract, I have to go to these press events. Please understand that I will be at all press events for 10 minutes. And I reserve the right not to answer questions that I deem inappropriate. That's why it's also important to have people in your village that are looking at those contracts with you. Don't just sign something because somebody puts it in front of you. If you have lots of anxiety about being in the public and you are a public figure and you are signing a contract, what does that contract say about my obligation about being in front of the press? And how am I going to manage that? Don't be a sheep. Read before you sign, right? So yeah, so I fully support what she did because she needed a minute. She needed a minute. And actually the Calm app has now that company has come out and said they're going to pay her fines for her.
And that's good. But as your friend said about the contract, if that's her obligation, she has to get it together and do that. And then another thing that you brought up when you said that, because I was thinking, you and I talked about this before we got on the air about somebody. And we were talking about in production. And I said, now, I'll be honest, in production mode, I may at times, you may catch me at a bad time after a show and I'm busy and I know that I'm on the clock and we got to get out of the venue. I may not be talkative and speakative and all of that kind of stuff, and somebody can walk away with a negative attitude about that. But so because don't we put a lot of expectation on people when they're just doing their job?
We do. You know, sometimes that's all about grace. We talk about grace here a lot. We got to give people some grace.
Yeah.
And we don't do that. Because again, especially if you have a contractual obligation, not only is the expectation that you show up, the expectation that you show up and you are grateful that we allow you to show up when we force you to show up. Right? And not only that you show up, but you show up and you better be happy. Women get that a lot. People of color get that a lot. And especially Black women. You better be happy you got this job. Skinning and grinning, right? So it's about giving people grace even when they show up. They may just had a bad day, right? Maybe they are just getting they're getting out of a game that they lost. I mean, think back at the interviews with Serena after she lost, and there were a couple times where she just broke down, right? Because she was so upset at her own performance. She wasn't mad about anything else. Yeah. She was upset about her own performance, but she got up in front of all these people asking these questions, and people will ask questions that are the most invasive because they feel like they have the right to do it.
You're right.
And they do because they're in the press, but you also have a right not to answer or to kindly put people in their place. Because you don't have to be nasty, but you can be very clear that that is inappropriate. And I'm not answering that question because that particular piece of my life is off limits. It has nothing to do with how or when I play whatsoever. It's like people giving Harry and Meghan a lot of hard time right now because they said they want to be out of the public eye, but then they're doing all these interviews. We got to give these folks some grace, right? They wanted to be out of the public eye under that kind of royal thing, and I'm clearly putting words in their mouth, right? But that doesn't mean that they don't understand the obligation of being public. They are public figures now, whether they want to be or not. So they have to use that. You know, you really have to think about how you're showing up. You have to think about how you're showing up. Yes, Kendall, an event versus the pattern of behavior, right? Just like people, when you saw Serena get mad and throw her racket down, oh my God, you know, mad Black woman syndrome. Think about John McEnroe.
Oh God.
Okay. Nobody was saying all this stuff about John McEnroe. They were just like, oh, here he goes again. So it was a pass for him on his pattern of behavior. But her one event, all of a sudden the world was coming to an end in tennis, and she just did not have the right attitude and the right disposition to be on, you know, the court at Wimbledon. So there's all kinds of cultural stuff around it too, around how we show up and how we engage. But at the end of the day, one, read your contracts, right? If you have to show up, you have to show up. And leaders, even if you don't have a contractual obligation, if someone's paying you for a job, you have an obligation to show up and to show up the best of your ability. And here's where communication is key. And I've used this with my teams a lot. Guys, today is one of those days. There is so much going on that I'm not at liberty to share with you today. So if I'm a little shorter and a little less patient and I'm moving quickly, no, it's not you. There's a lot of stuff happening. I'm trying to get some stuff solid. I will give it to you as soon as I can. But you put people on notice, especially when you understand you're not in your normal behavior pattern. But that requires you to know you, to be good with you, and to be honest about you, and to be willing to show up authentically.
I like what you said earlier too about also knowing the teams that you lead. Everybody's not motivated the same way. And I was thinking about a little birthday party we had here for Pete, and the kids were here. I call them kids. They're much younger than me. We're here, but I wouldn't invite you to that because you've already stated that you're not a networker, you're not a party goer or whatever. But we engage in other ways like plants and flowers.
Yes.
So, but somebody could look at that. Somebody did look and say, "Well, why you didn't tell me?" And I'm like, "Cause you don't like cake. Cause you don't want to be bothered." Okay.
Somebody posted a meme said, "You need to get okay with not being invited." I'm so okay with not being invited.
Me too.
I'm so okay with not being invited. I don't have to be invited to the party, y'all. I really don't. It's okay. It's okay, right? Now, right? When you're leading and stuff like that, you got to make sure if you're being inclusive, you got to invite, quote unquote, invite everyone to the party.
Mhm.
What that means is you give everyone space to be who they are and to show up and engage and contribute.
That's good.
But I don't have any problem with somebody saying, yeah, we didn't call you because we didn't think you would come. You know what? You are probably exactly right. But I was there in spirit.
But it's like children. Like a parent needs to know they're different children.
Yes.
And what makes them motivated. Because even when you brought it up about the motivational speaker or the exercise guy, I was listening to this guy this morning, and I was like, oh no, that's the overkill for me. You don't need to holler at me. You ain't got to do all that because it's gonna get done. Because everybody works differently. Yes. When that sounds motivating to somebody else, that sounds threatening to me. Like, you
exactly. Well, and it was an aha moment for me too, listening to his book, That Can't Hurt Me book, because it doesn't take much, because of my history, it doesn't take much for someone talking about accountability to start sounding like judgment to me. Right. And I have to watch, that's my own head trash, right? I'm very well aware of it's my own head trash. And so listening to this person, I had to really put it in context, because number one, he doesn't know me, right? I don't know him. He was doing what he needed to do for him. So what can I take from his lessons that worked for me? And he was very clear that, look, I'm not passing judgment on anybody else. This is my life. This is how I had to live my life. This is what I had to do for me. And I'm just telling you that your mind is stronger than you think it is. What do you need to do for you to push yourself to really get to the goal you say you want? Because the thing that's getting in your way is your mind. That's it. Because he said, and one of the things he said was, your mind knows all your secrets. Your mind knows your fears, knows your insecurities, knows what you're worried about, and uses that. And that was powerful. Because most of the times when we don't get what we want, it's because we have not given ourselves the opportunity or put ourselves in the place to get it.
And I like what you call it, head trash. I was saying that this morning. I'm like, where did I get that from? But that's from you. You say head trash all the time, because a lot of stuff we get offended by, it really is our own head trash. Yeah. And that might not even be the case. So that was good that you said. Yeah. And good. Can we say hello to you?
Yes, please.
We go? Good morning to Jackie Foreman. Good morning to Miss Bowman. Good morning to Sherry Duff. Good morning to Michelle. Good morning to Chiquita Morris. Good morning to Nicholas. First time listening.
Yes, good morning, Nicholas.
Good morning to you. Good morning to Lady B Short on today. Thank you guys for tuning in.
Thank you so much, everybody. Yeah, we're a little bit over. So thank you, Kendall. Thank you for everybody that was on my Facebook page and StreamYard. I appreciate it. I love spending this time with you guys. We will be back next week. So much stuff going on. I got some cool stuff coming up. We're going to start having guests here probably in the fall. It's too hot right now, already in Texas, but we'll start having some guests in the fall. So thank y'all for being here. I will be on Clubhouse on Wednesday. We're going to continue the conversation. So the link is on my Facebook page.
You said Android can get Clubhouse now, right?
Android can get Clubhouse now. So DM me. I think I have a few invites. So DM me if you need an invite. Thank y'all. See you next week. Bye.